Michael Porter Jr. is going to be special in this league. Let's get into this. In high school, Michael Porter Jr. was one of the most hyped prospects in a long time. And at that time, a lot of people thought that it was a foregone conclusion that Michael Porter Jr. was going to be the #1 overall pick in that year's draft. But unfortunately, Michael Porter Jr. was dealing with some back issues that started to come up at that time. And when you're talking about back issues, that's usually pretty bad. Michael Porter Jr. got multiple back surgeries going into that NBA's draft, and a lot of teams were very scared off by that. After having the talent to be the #1 overall pick, clearly, he ended up falling all the way down to the 14th overall pick in the 2018 NBA draft by the Denver Nuggets. Now, I actually personally think that this was probably the best case scenario that could have happened for Michael Porter's sake. Now, obviously, the obvious reason for this is he's going to the Denver Nuggets, who are a pretty good team, and he can really learn from the best players and continue to get better that way. Of course, that's the obvious. But the real reason why I think that the Denver Nuggets were the best place for Michael Porter Jr. to go was the fact that the Denver Nuggets were super patient. They already had very good players, so they didn't necessarily need Michael Porter right away. So they gave him a full season just to rest, and he could just rest on the sidelines and slowly get back into things at his own pace, and he can come back when he's ready, which is the best thing for him, I think. And for the Denver Nuggets perspective, they drafted a potential #1 overall pick at that 14 spot just due to the fact that he had injury concerns. So if he was injured and he didn't play for the rest of his career, and he didn't really have a great career, it's all filled with injuries, it's kind of whatever at that point. You picked him at the 14th overall pick, but if he panned out to what he's supposed to be, you just hit a home run. But let's get back onto Michael Porter Jr. So I really do think Michael Porter Jr. is special in this league, but let's break down his game to see why. Now, Michael Porter Jr. is 6'10" and has point guard type skills in this league, which is crazy within itself, in terms of his movement out there on the court and his ball handling and shooting ability. Now let's start with Michael Porter Jr.'s 3-point ability and shooting ability. Now, Michael Porter Jr., when you watch him out there, you can clearly tell he has a great stroke out there. He has a perfect form, and he's really hitting his threes very early on in his career. This season, Michael Porter is shooting an incredible 45% from 3, which is just, that's crazy. And it's not like Michael Porter Jr. is only taking 1 3 per game. He's taking 6.3 threes per game. It's pretty crazy. Now, obviously, Michael Porter Jr. is definitely an elite shooter in this league, and maybe next year, in a few years or whatever, maybe soon, he'll come back down to earth and shoot maybe above 38%, but even then, that's a very good percentage. And even mid-range shooting for Michael Porter Jr. is very efficient. He can easily get to his spots, and when he pulls up from that mid-range spot, he's very efficient as well. MPJ just has a very clean and efficient shot, and that's definitely his best trait. But moving on to other skills about MPJ, let's move on to his finishing ability at the basket. Now, definitely Michael Porter Jr. is super athletic in this league. We saw him get multiple posterizing dunks, especially that one at the beginning of this video when he posterized Montrezl Harrell in the bubble. That was pretty crazy. But he's obviously super athletic, but he does have those back issues that I mentioned before, so you want to be a little careful with that. You really don't want to see MPJ try to dunk over the defender every time out there. There could be issues with that if he continues to do that every play. But obviously, he's super athletic, and some plays he definitely does posterize people and can. But when you talk about MPJ's layup ability, not only dunks, he also has a pretty good ability to get around defenders mid-air and finish with pretty difficult layups, but also get the right angles for him to be able to make that layup. MPJ uses his athleticism very well even when he's not dunking over people and just finishing around the basket. MPJ is definitely very prolific when getting to the basket as well as obviously shooting, but getting on to the next thing about MPJ that makes him special is his ball handling ability. Now, as I touched on before, MPJ is 6'10" and has guard-like skills in terms of his movement and ball handling. When you watch MPJ out there, you can just tell that he's been working on his handle throughout his whole life. He's just so smooth with it out there, and especially for that size, it's pretty crazy. Now, obviously, in terms of overall game, he's nowhere near Kevin Durant, but he kind of reminds me of Kevin Durant in the fact that they both have that size at 6'10". KD's a little taller, closer to 7 foot, but they're both around the same height, and they both have that very smooth ball handling. I think the fact that MPJ is such a great ball handler for his size, and really just in general, he's a very good ball handler, on top of also being able to move that well at that 6'10" size, I think that's what really makes him very special in this league. When you look around the league, yeah, there's guys that could shoot as well as MPJ can, but they can't get to the basket. And there's other guys that are his size that can get to the basket, but they can't shoot. There's other guys that can't handle the ball. Most of the guys his size really can't handle the ball nearly as well as he can, even half of what he can do. And when you think about all those things and look at MPJ, he literally has all those things combined. So if he could really put this together and stay healthy, which is the biggest key for him, I think he's really going to be special in this league and potentially a superstar. In MPJ's first season, the Denver Nuggets were really taking it slow with him because obviously, as I mentioned multiple times, he's been dealing with that back issue, which is pretty serious. So as a team, you really want to bring him along slowly. But in his first season, he only averaged 16 minutes per game, and he averaged around basically 10 points per game on 50% from the field, which is really good, just to get his feet wet within the league and see what he can do in the league. But this season, the Denver Nuggets really felt more comfortable with MPJ and really ramped up his minutes. This season, he's averaging 31 minutes per game, which is good because that means the Denver Nuggets are really trusting MPJ in terms of his health as well. And this season, MPJ has stayed relatively healthy, so that's definitely a very good sign going forward for him. But on top of that, obviously this season, MPJ really took the next step. He's averaging an incredible 19.4 points per game, 7.4 rebounds per game, and only 1.1 assists per game, but he's not known for being a passing guy, at least at this stage of his career anyway, so that's not too big of a deal. I'm not worried about that part. And especially with the Denver Nuggets, Jokic is the guy who really gets the team running in terms of his playmaking ability anyway, so it's really no big deal. Eventually, I would like to see MPJ get somewhat of a playmaking and passing ability going when he's getting double teamed, when he's really going off in some games, but for now, it's not really that big of a deal. But looking at MPJ's points per game this season, he's averaging 19.4 points per game on a very efficient shooting as well. That shows a very mature player out there. Obviously, some players, especially to the talent of MPJ, could easily put up 20 plus points per game, but if they're not efficient, that shows their youth and inexperience. But with a guy like MPJ, he's putting up those numbers, but he's also super efficient, so that really gets me excited going forward. The efficiency is really what changes it for me. MPJ is definitely turning into a very good player going forward. But going forward, if I want to see a next step from this guy, I would say I would like to see him isolate a little bit more, because right now he's more of just a catch and shoot guy that isolates at times, but I would like to see him mainly isolate and really get the ball in the block and see what he can do with it. But that will definitely come with time for him. I'm not too worried about it. But right now anyway, they have great ball movement going and very good team ball out there, and especially with Nikola Jokic finding guys for wide open shots, which really helps MPJ. I really do think the fact that MPJ is such a great shooter out there, combined with his ability to get to the basket at that size, combined with his movement at that size and his ball handling at that size, really makes this guy a very good player going forward and a very special guy. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Michael Porter Jr. will be special in this league going forward, or do you think the injuries will catch up with him, or do you think he's just not good enough to be that type of special guy? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. Until the next time, peace out, guys.